about work, there's all this controversy in the U.S. and the world about how to reopen, when to reopen, what to reopen. Based on what we know, given that we want some balance, it's a complicated question, but given that we want some balance between allowing people to earn money and earn a living because starving is not a positive outcome.
Yeah.
And we would prefer not to go right back to where we are with overwhelmed hospitals and an increased mortality rate because the hospitals can't serve the need. What do we know that what, from your perspective, how do we do that? Like I mentioned, and for everybody, I will end the question. I run a big team, and my team works in a regular office, and their desks are pretty close together. And I'm being asked, I'm having to think about how do I return my team to the office? When, under what conditions, lots of things. So what can you tell me? What should I think about?
Well, I think a major factor would be to have people wear face masks,
Okay.
right? And wear them properly. And maybe we need to have some new designs that are much easier to deploy and so forth. And I know a lot of people are thinking about this. That would really help cut down transmission. That would be my first request, is that, okay, if you want your people to go back to work, let's have them wear face masks. Let's have them sit a little further apart. I saw some photos of restaurants where some of the tables are X'd so you don't sit too close to people. Maybe that was Singapore. So you can space people out in the office. But I do think the face mask is an essential part, and you have to wear it all day. And maybe you couple that with fever checks, daily fever checks. So we have labs at Columbia where people work on SARS-CoV-2, and every day in the morning and at night they get a fever check. And if people develop a fever, they get a test, and if they're positive, they stay home. And I think those three things, face masks, distancing at work, and fever checks, can help. And you can stage this. You don't have to have everyone come back at once. You could have small businesses start to fire up again because they're the ones at risk for losing their business. And with the understanding, if you have a little restaurant, everybody has to come in with a face mask. You have to space out the customers and so forth. And in your business, for example, you could not bring in everyone at once. You can have some people stay home who can work from home and others come in. But I do think that the face masks, which we're just starting to get used to, right, in this country, after we were told we should wear them and people are making their own, it's really great. I think that's a big factor in this. We may have to wear those for quite a while if you want to go back to work.
My mom is making face masks for her community. She's made like 20 for a bunch of the people in like Tahoe. It's a very small area. You can't find them. Is there evidence now? I remember we talked about that at first. I think it's a really important distinction. Outside of N95 face masks, is there evidence now that regular face masks made at home are appropriate for reducing transmission?
Well, nobody has done the study. People have studies with N95s and surgical masks, but if you can construct one that is a reasonably thick fabric, not a sheer fabric, but a good thick fabric that's going to hang up droplets. That's what you want to do. You want to hang up droplets either coming in or going out. It'll work. And unfortunately, we have known this, but the CDC and WHO decided to tell us at the beginning of this outbreak not to wear face masks, which I think was a big error in retrospect.
I think that was in part a supply issue, right? They didn't.
It might have been.
They felt it was more important that if we all ran out and bought face masks, the people most at risk would not be able to get them. And even today, it's not like I can go to my local grocery store and, sort of milk, eggs, face masks. It's not available yet.
Right.
Which is why, Devin's mom is making them, and my wife's mom has made us face masks, and all out of sort of available home materials. But it is something that, covers enough of your face that if you sneeze or whatever, it's not going to project. So it would be a positive. I agree it would limit transmission. So one of the things my chat was asking, which I'll certainly share, I don't normally talk about Amazon, but just for any company, I think there will be, I'll just say about any company, there's people who need to be in the office more than others. And I strongly believe that my team and other teams will go back in a very measured, slow way that starts with critical people only, because some jobs can be done from home and some can't. I'll share more gleefully. There's a large lobby within my team that's like, hey, this works great. Let's never go back. They found that they're just as effective from home. And we have some evidence to support that. And so obviously
that's really interesting. That is really interesting.
Yeah. I think I've connected with a lot of people around the industry. A lot of companies have found that their teams are highly effective from home. Not all.
Yeah.
And it's simple. For example, this I can share. I surveyed a number of members on my team, and the average team member had a 2-hour commute, one hour to get to the office, 1 hour to get back. And so if you give them those 2 hours back, even if they're slightly less efficient from home, they're very willing to put in one of the hours to do their job and one of the hours to come watch us here on Twitch. And they end up being as effective or more effective. So I've done other shows on that, Devin, you know this, about how the future of work, I think, is forever changed. But
I love this subject from you. This is like one of the most interesting things we've talked about recently. The fact that like companies might just be like, yeah, like we're just not going to do that thing anymore. You're just not going to take the BART for 2 hours to go into San Francisco. Like it's cool now.
Yeah,
I love it. Yeah.
I don't want to take away from, maybe you and I should make this our next show. We'll go
Actually, good idea.
Yeah.
I could bitch about open offices for 100 hours, 1,000 hours, like 10,000 hours. I could Malcolm Gladwell that shit.
I will give you a thought. Vincent wants to add something. Please go ahead.
So what you said is important. So the staging is important. So every little thing you do, so you do some masks, you do staging, so you don't have everyone come in at once. It reduces the risk, right? When you have fewer people coming in, especially if 5 or 10% of them are immune, then it really cuts down on the likelihood of transmission. If you do this in the warm, humid months, it's even better. And then if you do the fever checks on top of it, I really think this makes a big difference overall. So everything you do adds a little bit to the safety. So, you don't send everyone back, no face masks, business as usual. No, you have to stage it. You face mask, fever check. I think if you do that, you can come through it. And then as soon as one person gets ill, then you send them home and you make sure you keep checking everyone else to make sure you don't have an outbreak. I really do think that works, especially in places where like New York, where the numbers are going down.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're going to have more aggressive quarantining, whether it's voluntary or not. This idea of contact tracing will also be implemented, that if someone turns...
So forth. Yeah.
I think one of the best examples was Seattle. Like we had the first case of it. We everybody freaked out. It hit an old folks home really hard, and then a bunch of people there died. Seattle took it very seriously, and then I think we had the potential to be a New York type situation, but people cut it off very quickly. And Jay Ensley took it really seriously. It was good.
Well, one way I track the stats every day because I'm a numbers geek, so I'm holding them here on my phone. And, at one point we had the most infections, the most confirmed infections of any state in the union until New York surpassed us. And now we're like 14th or 15th. And Indiana, for better or for worse, looks like they plan to bump us down one more notch tomorrow. Plan in quotes, of course. So we have had good luck, good fortune controlling things here so far. Devin, remind me at the end, if we have time, I'll come back to what I believe is the impact, and there are some stock watchers in chat. I'll come back to the impact of work from home and venture capital, which I'm sure would, because there's a clear connection coming there.
For sure.
So going back to, we talked a little bit about testing, but I know it's a hot topic, Vincent. You talked some about antibody tests and how they were unknown reliability. But in the news, there's this constant drumbeat. There isn't enough testing. There isn't enough testing. Can you say a little bit about, is that true or not? And why is that? And will it get fixed? because
Yes,
that's a big element.
it remains true. And as you know, there are two kinds of tests, right? There's a test for nucleic acid, a PCR-based test, typically that tells you if you are currently infected. But once you have been infected and you're resolved the infection in a couple of weeks, there's no more virus in you, the PCR won't tell you anything. And that's where the antibody test comes in. And they're two very different tests. The PCR, you take a nasal swab and you look for the viral nucleic acid. The antibody test, you need blood. Actually, you could do it from saliva probably, but the blood is the easiest. And you look for the antibody proteins that we make in response to viruses, right? The clampers. And so we can design rapid dipstick type tests to look for antibodies. We take the matrix in these little plastic contraptions. You know, the pregnancy test that you urinate on, it's the same idea. It's looking for, in that case, it's looking for a protein, but we're looking for antibodies. So on the matrix, we put viral protein, and then you put a little bit of blood, it wicks over and it catches on to the protein if you have some antibodies. And so that tells you if you've been infected either in the last couple of weeks or months or even years. It can detect those antibodies in your blood. Now, one of the complications that needs to be sorted out, if you search for these rapid tests, you'll see a picture of these little, they're called lateral flow assays, they're dipsticks. They're usually a couple of lines that appear. There's a control line that tells you that the assay worked. You put your drop of blood, you prick your thumb with a needle that comes with the kit. You put the drop of blood in a little hole at one end. It mixes with the fluid and it wicks up. And then you get lines if the test works. There's one line that's an internal control to make sure the test is working at all. And then there's a line for what's called IgG and another line for IgM. And those are two kinds of antibodies.
Oh, I know about this. Yeah.
So when you're infected with a virus, the first antibodies you make are IgM.
IgM, right? And they last for a short amount of time, fade out. IgG stays with you, but IgM is what the test detects.
Yeah. So you make IgM really quickly, and it goes away, and IgG comes up. And you know, IgM, you can detect both. If your test is good, you should detect both of them, because IgM tends to be more cross-reactive, and so they could cross-react with seasonal. Say if you put in the test SARS-CoV-2 protein, the antibody that you have to a seasonal coronavirus could pick up IgM or show IgM positivity. Right. You've had a recent seasonal infection. So the companies need to be careful with that, and I'm not sure they all are. And so that could complicate it. It could say you're positive, but you're infected with a common cold coronavirus. So that's just an issue that needs to be dealt with. I don't hear anybody talking about it, but maybe it's too confusing for the news. I don't know. But these antibody tests will just tell you if you've made a response, as I said before, to the virus. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're protected. It's not quantitative. It doesn't really tell you how much antibody you have. That requires a more complicated test that takes longer, and a sophisticated lab. It can't be done in 15 minutes. And
you need to do a blood test, right? Like a Western blot. Yeah.
And you could do a Western, or you can do an ELISA or something. Yeah, it takes time, and we're not going to be doing those, especially on millions of people. Right, so as I said earlier, we're going to rely on these antibody tests to give an indication of the immunity of the population. And we're not going to distinguish between antibodies that can block infection and antibodies that just clamp onto the virus. And it might be okay. We'll see. As I said earlier, it's kind of an experiment.
On a scale from 1 to 10, how much do you enjoy getting the satisfaction of using the analogy of clampers for the viruses?
Yeah, I just thought of that, actually. I figured a lot of people would appreciate that. It's a picture you can think of in your head, something clamping onto a virus, right?
Chat likes it a lot. They enjoy clamping, the clampers.
The clampers.
Any clampers in chat?
Well, while we're asking 1 to 10 loaded questions, in one of our 2 past visits, we ask you to rate this outbreak or this pandemic from a spectrum of 0 to the bubonic plague. And last time you selected a 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Now that we've had another month of world results, what do you see? Would you stick by that, or would you worsen it or downgrade it?
I said 4 or 5, right?
I think you did, yeah.
I would put it at a 5. I would abandon the 4. Yeah. And
Yeah,
I
so
think
a little
mainly
worse than you had hoped.
it's worse. And I think mainly, well, we've had a bad situation in Italy since we've talked last, right? It got really worse, and many people died. Huge numbers every day, hundreds of people dying every day. So that really made an impact, and that was because it has an older population, and the healthcare system got overwhelmed and so forth. But also, I'm looking at the impact on the economy and unemployment. The numbers are astounding. All these people out of work.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah, unemployment has in 5 weeks reached a percentage-wise similar level to the Great Depression.
And it might be higher. We just don't have the data yet.
Yeah. I mean, it's. But what we know is it's faster, right? Every previous recession has been sort of. We've never tried to throw the off switch on business before.
Are we in a depression now?
Well, so no one is.
Yeah. The answer is
unknown yet.
Well, the answer is we saw 24% rates of unemployment in the Great Depression, and conservative estimates right now have us around 20% unemployment. And like Ethan said, the big thing about that is that in the Great Depression, you had a restaurant shut down over time. It took a couple of months. You're kind of running out of business. You run out of money. You let some staff go. In COVID-19, it happened in a day and everyone's gone. So the implications of that are literally like we have never seen anything like this happen before. And it could be a real shit show, but we don't really know until the economic data runs us a quarter out, right? But it's super spooky.
I mean, that's why I put it at a 5, because I don't think the virus has changed at all. And, a lot of people were infected last time, but just the impact and social impact as well. I did a podcast last week with a neuroscientist, and she said, the psychological impact is huge, especially for people who are unstable to begin with and are having problems. Now they have to stay home. They have lost their connection to others, right? She said that's going to have a long-term toll, and that's really frightening.
Yeah.
And so I feel we were just kind of getting along, right? Society is very fragile, and we're breaking it in a way and I don't think that's very good. So that's why I think it's higher. And most people don't look at, when you look at outbreaks, look at that, but you should. If you go back in history and look at the effect of viruses on society, they've been huge in certain instances. The bubonic plague for one, but if you go to the colonists and the explorers who came from the old world to the new, they brought these viruses with them and wiped out native populations, completely changed the balance of power, without which maybe things would have been very different. So
that was literally smallpox, right?
Smallpox and measles brought over. Yeah.
And I was shocked, actually. No one knows for certain, but the best estimates of how many native people there were in the Americas when the first ships arrived, our history doesn't cover that because the viruses spread much faster than the explorers. And so basically the population had died off before the explorers got there. And so we never realized how many people had been there. And I was just, we're a little bit in the weeds, although it's great for virus history, but the Americas had many, many more people than I think we realize. We kind of think of it as mostly empty-ish with some tribes, and that was not true. As best
certainly 2 to 3 million Aztecs were killed by infection, just Aztecs alone, right?
That was a virus as well, and the Aztecs.
Smallpox and smallpox for Aztecs, and of course the Incas as well. And there were millions of people, very sophisticated societies, and they had never seen these viruses emerged in the Middle East, right? They emerged when civilizations were building and got large enough to sustain virus infections. We got measles from cows. We got smallpox from camels, all in the eastern part of Africa. And then they spread to Europe as our populations grew. And then as soon as we were able to cross the ocean, they went over as well.
And without, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to follow up on the same thing. The image is imagine what we're seeing now with COVID, but in populations that have no ability, no understanding of what's happening, no notion of social distancing, no communication mechanism. And so think of how COVID would be spreading in New York if no one knew anything, knew what to do about it, and life had just gone on.
Well, that was my question, was like without modern medicine, we're basically fucked. Like that was what happened there.
Well, you could say that, or you could say it's good. It sorts out things.
That's the Thanos approach. Yeah. I see you've taken to the Thanos school of thought.
Go back with a few exceptions in history. We don't know much about big outbreaks or medium-sized outbreaks. There's no medicine to record it. People die, and we don't know why they're dying. We can see a few pandemics in the 1800s and Black Plague and so forth, smallpox outbreaks. But I think mainly people would die here and there, and no one had a clue what killed them. And it may have been the same virus, and no one would have known because there was really no medicine. And then if you even go back further, when we were hunter-gatherers, right, living in bands of 100 to 200 people, I'm sure a virus was introduced. You go hunt an animal, you get their virus, and maybe it wiped out half of the tribe, but no one ever knew. No record of it whatsoever. So we
thought it was a curse, or
the gods were angry with us.
Yeah, totally.
Mm-hmm.
So you said, does medicine save us? For sure. Science and medicine have the capacity to save us, and that's why we live so long now, right? We used to die in our 30s and 40s. Mm-hmm. And now, since 1900, our life expectancy is over 70. And it's because of medicine, public health, and scientific research that's done that. And you can ask the question, is that good? Because, now we get old and we get diseases like cancers and Alzheimer's that we never had before.
Yeah.
Is that good? But it's what we have decided to do as a society, right? The majority of us have decided that medicine is the way to go. We should save lives and be kind. It's amazing, humans being kind to each other, right? But that's what we've decided to do. And so that's the course we're taking, where we're trying to save lives and make people live as long as possible. I don't know if you'd want to live forever, but that's a possibility one day.
Yeah, death doesn't have to be a foregone conclusion, right?
Mm-hmm. It's possible to live a long, long time. We can figure out the source. I'm not sure people want to really do that. I think just saving people at birth and young age and so forth is important, and we can't really do that on a regular basis yet. So I think that's a priority, so people can have a long life, right?
Yeah, I don't think very few wise people would choose to be immortal. I think. I mean, after just watching Twitch chat for long enough, you'll just want to die. Like it'll be over. I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. But yeah.
Not immortal under current conditions. Anyway.
Yeah.
So the serious aspect of this is, here we have this pandemic. This is not going to wipe out humanity. And, I told you that before, and you said, thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
Well, but actually the question that you said that in response to was, I have always imagined that there was going to be, because you rated this a 5. Yeah. I always thought a 9 was coming, but you told me that a virus that is both incredibly transmissible and incredibly lethal usually doesn't have, kind of like, the way that I understood it is like, do you play any video games, Vincent?
Not anymore. I used to.
Okay, so you know how like you put skill points into a character?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So like the way that I understood your explanation is, there's not a virus gets a certain number of skill points. They can put them into like transmissibleness or like lethality, and they don't have enough skill points to distribute to both. So we're never going to get like the super virus.
I agree. I think that's good. You have to balance transmissibility and lethality.
That's great news.
You kill your host. But people don't think that way. They think
gamers
you can
for the win.
So that's the thing with Ebola. Ebola is highly lethal, although if you know how to treat it, it's not lethal. It's illegal in Africa because it's not treated properly. And people are worried to become transmissible. And I would argue it's not, because it would kill off too many hosts before it could spread. But where I was really going with this was that we should be ready for anything that would be thrown at us, any virus, even if it happened to be highly lethal and transmissible. SARS-1 was quite more lethal than SARS-2, but we weren't ready. But I think we can be for anything that comes at us. We can have broad spectrum antivirals. We just need to work on them and put some investment in. And maybe, as we said earlier, maybe this will be the impetus to do some of that, because there's no reason why any virus should wipe us out. It's really embarrassing, in my view, that this virus is doing this, because it is really an embarrassment.
You're offended on behalf of humanity.
Yes, because we should have stopped it. We have the tech we have amazing scientific tech, and we should have stopped it, but we weren't ready. We just got complacent.
Well, 100 years since the last time, it's beyond memory in many ways.
Aren't all of these viruses that live within us that you were mentioning before, isn't that just complacency too? Like, in theory, we could probably have solved chickenpox and stuff like that. We practically have with chickenpox, but other herpes viruses, things like CMV, things like that. Like these are.
The CMV is a problem that people are working on, because we're all infected. And the problem is, if you get an organ transplant, CMV wreaks havoc on you.
Yeah.
It starts replicating, can kill you. And so it would be good to have a CMV vaccine in youth and prevent getting infected at all. And someday we'll have one. It's just a tough one to crack. So yes, some of those herpes viruses, we probably, well, you know, we're going to see one day. We're going to have vaccine against many of these herpes viruses, and then we'll see if it's bad not to have them. I think that's an interesting question. If you didn't have any herpes viruses your whole life, how would you be? What would your health be like? Would it be any different? Maybe you wouldn't be as healthy. You know?
There's a study I read. There's a theory that that herpes viruses actually increase your immunity because they reactivate quite often, so your immune system gets stronger.
Yes, for sure. In animals, you can show that. If you give mice a herpes virus, it protects them against bacterial infection, which brings me to another interesting story. I interviewed a guy on Twiv yesterday who believes that we should be giving oral polio vaccine to prevent SARS-CoV-2 infection. Did you hear?
Whoa.
So you know what oral polio vaccine is, right? It's a thing you drink and the virus goes in your gut, it multiplies, gives you immunity, and you don't get polio. And so it's been used to almost eradicate polio from the planet. And this guy who works at the FDA, his parents were very famous virologists in the Soviet Union. And they have data which showed that when you used this vaccine, which we'll call OPV, kids got fewer other infections. And there are even data today, now that we're massively immunizing the planet with OPV, there's good data that shows it suppresses other infections. It's temporary, and it's doing, as you say, it boosts some aspect of our immunity that gives us a general protection. You may have heard that in countries that use the tuberculosis vaccine, BCG, there seems to be a lower incidence of.
And the theory here is that the immune system is an entire system, right? So that one impact to it might benefit other sections.
Yes, there are parts of it that are not specific, right? That will block any infection. You know, the earliest responses, what we call the innate responses, are pretty general. And so, yeah, the idea is that the BCG, the OPV, they're boosting that. And for a couple of months, you have some protection. So he wants to do a clinical trial to test that. I think it's a very interesting hypothesis.
That's cool. That's really cool. Yeah.
I mean, that's not something I ever thought of. Like we talked to you last time about herbal remedies and stuff that boost the immune system, maybe, or vitamins. But
he shot that down, right?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I agree he shot it down. But we were fishing for what boosts the immune system. Obviously, some other controlled disease that elicits a response would do that, potentially.
Yeah. And, in the case of these two vaccines, they're used in humans. They've been extensively tested. They're safe, and they could potentially protect healthcare workers, for example. Or, if you want to go back to work, you take an OPV once every 4 months. Who knows? I think it's worth exploring. I think it's quite interesting.
Well, at this point, as you said, we're trying all kinds of drugs looking for things that buy time. I want to ask, you mentioned the summer being helpful, and there's a lot of hope around that. There's a lot of complexity there, though. There are those who theorize that Americans spend so much time inside in air conditioning that the effects of that are muted. There are those who theorize that because we have such limited herd immunity that the overriding effect, like the seasonal response, is not strong enough to really overcome COVID. Can you say a couple things about because we do see infections in warm countries, like Singapore is pretty warm, and you pointed out they've had a huge outbreak. So can you just scope the size of the summer effect a little bit?
So, there's never one size fits all when we talk about seasonality, because influenza is seasonal here in the Northeast. It's seasonal where you are, where we have a winter, right? And the seasonality means the numbers go down, but they don't go away. They decline substantially in the winter. And that's a combination of the climate, the low humidity and cold, which preserves infectivity, and the building population immunity from the previous season, right? You have, sorry, I got it mixed up. So in the summer, it gets warmer, it gets more humid, that drops transmission, but that's combined with the growing population immunity from the season before. So I do think, yes, the two have to work together to bring it down. Seasonality is a combination of the two, and maybe other things that we don't know about as well. So for flu, it's very clear that in temperate climates, it's seasonal, but it doesn't go away over the summer. You always have summer infections here and there. It's not the same, far less. We've had 20 million flu infections in the U.S. so far this season, and they're not going to be that many over the summer. It'll be a fraction of that, but there are some. So there's still transmission, and it may be that people working inside in air conditioning are transmitting viruses in ways that we hadn't encountered before air conditioning. But the confounding factor is that in the tropics, flu is also seasonal, right? Where it's always hot and humid. And so we don't understand that at all. So it must be that under some conditions, these viruses can still transmit effectively. It could be that the mode of transmission is slightly different. It may not be aerosol in the tropics. It may be more contact, and people living together in families, for example, may be the main ones that are spreading infection. So it's a complication we don't understand. So for SARS-CoV-2, the only data we have is that the seasonal coronaviruses, well, there you go. They're seasonal, right? That means in the winter we have more of them, and in the spring they go away. And so we think their physical properties are amenable to being shut down by the hot weather and the humidity. As I said before, we think SARS-CoV-2 is another coronavirus, very much like the seasonal ones, except that it's brand new, and that's why we have the current situation. So I think it's very likely that we'll see some seasonality, even if the population immunity is low.
Well, it's definitely a good thesis that I don't hear this talked about much at all in the news anywhere, that there are 4 other well-known, common, circulate every year coronaviruses. No one talks about that I hear in mainstream media.
Yeah.
And the result is, I think you have a strong case that those are seasonal. And so there's at least a valid basis to hope that that COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, will also be seasonal. There's no proof, and obviously the lack of immunity could mean that we'll still have ongoing transmission, but there's hope.
Yeah, no, I think it's a reasonable hope. As you say, there are no data yet. We don't have any information because the virus is too new and no one's been able to do the right studies. But I think and as I said earlier, everything we say in science is based on our base of knowledge, right? And so we know a lot about these seasonal coronas. And I think it's reasonable to think that we'll see some decrease. I don't know how much, but I would be really surprised if we kept ongoing transmission at these levels over the summer here. Now, someone could say, well, it's in some very hot places in the world, right? And yeah, it's just like flu, where it's infecting people in the tropics all year round, or seasonally in the tropics. There are paradoxes that we can't explain. But you go where the data are, right? And I think seasonality is most likely what we're going to see with this.
We'll know in a few months. Devin.
Yeah, we're not there yet. It's still very early here in the Northeast, and I guess where you are too, it's still a bit chilly, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's warmer. It's been warm in Seattle kind of lately. I'm a one jacket sort of person right now, so it's pretty good. But I walk everywhere, right? And it's been pretty nice. People, no one really around. The most annoying thing is the grocery stores, because you have to go early and there's lines.
Yeah.
But if it prevents people from dying, I guess I will get my burritos an hour later.
wearing masks there in these when they go to the store, for example?
The vast majority, and then sometimes you see like the older people in like mechanized suits, like they're like battle mechs. Like they have like I saw an old dude in a Whole Foods with like an N300 mask, dude. It had like two things on it. He had like a freaking like gas mask. The guy was like, he had like armored gloves. The dude was ready, was rocking it. I'd say like upwards of 80 to 90% of people have masks on.
And do you think that coincided with the CDC saying a couple of weeks ago you should wear masks?
I don't know. I think a lot of people just do what societally is like cool to do. And so a lot of like, for example, Trader Joe's went like super draconian and they're only allowing like 10 people in the store at a time. Every one of the employees wears masks. So I think that sets like a social example. I mean, you'd probably know this, right? Like more than I would, but like I think that sets a social example. I'm just shooting from the hip. I'm talking on my ass right now. I think that sets a social example for people to do it. I don't know.
I agree. I think that's a big part of it. Yeah, my daughter works at a Trader Joe's, and she says they're very strict about how many people, and even outside they make people space apart in line, right? So
yes,
close to each other.
Totally. Yeah, and it's like a huge thing. Like I actually haven't been able to shop at Trader Joe's. I used to shop there pretty much every day, and I just I can't wait in line for an hour to get my food, or sometimes I'm here too late. And I just can't get there because also the store hours are reduced.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of takeout and I'm getting horrendously fat. That's just not good, man.
So your 80 to 90% mask figure is amazing, but what we're seeing, I live in a different part of Seattle, and we're seeing 50% wear masks.
Really?
And it absolutely went up from like barely 5% to say 50. When the recommendation changed, like very shortly after the recommendation came out that said, please wear masks, it went from very few people to quite a few.
Interesting.
We have here in New Jersey, you can't go into a store without a mask. That's a governor's statement, right? So
you
don't have that there, I think, right?
No, it's not that strong. It's, but I'm guessing, and I'm only guessing, that workplaces will go down that path, because one of the things that's going to motivate workplaces we can talk about, one of the things that's going to motivate workplaces I saw in the news today is workplaces are asking for indemnity. They're asking to be made safe from being sued, that as long as they follow whatever the official recommendations are, like if you call me in to work at your company, as long as you're following whatever the local health rules have laid out for social distancing or masks or whatever, if I then get coronavirus that I can prove or trace came from another employee, I can't sue you as an employer and say you didn't protect me. That's what they're asking for. The point of that is not to get into the legal case or the ethical case, but just, my guess is, if the mindset is, oh, I could be liable for employee illness because I could be liable, just like having an unsafe workplace if I leave power tools or atom bombs or whatever laying around. We keep our atom bombs locked up in the desk drawer. I could be liable. Well, I think there'll be a stronger push in workplaces for masks and other things.
I think it makes sense. I think it's as you say, it's similar to liability and having a safe place. If people trip, if you're washing the floor and you don't have a sign and people slip, they can sue your establishment for hurting, right? You didn't mark it out. So this kind of would be in the same area, although I'm not a lawyer, and probably they are gearing up to deal with this big time. But I think it's part of how you go back to work. You have to put certain regulations, and in a store, just like a workplace, you should wear a mask. And maybe you even limit the number of people that go into a store, not as much as you are now, but still not let it be as crowded as before, as part of the early phase in to going back. And I think people would be absolutely fine with that, as long as they can have a little bit of normalcy, right? It doesn't all have to come back.
Completely. All of our stores here, and I would assume this is common at least across the U.S., all of our stores here have tape on the floor. So when you get up to the registers, there's literally tape that's like 6 feet apart, 6 feet apart. And so instead of everyone crowding and huddling together, you stand on the tape mark and you move forward one unit at a time.
Exactly.
And I would imagine that will be with us for the rest of the year anyway.
Most likely.
And I would say, to your point, I've been thinking about this a lot. So since you and I last spoke, Vincent, I've dedicated more and more of my time to this because I think its impact on the workplace is amazing to think through how this is going to change the workplace. And one of the things is we can remove all the restrictions tomorrow in theory that says, hey, go back to doing whatever you want. Many people are going to social distance for a while, whether they're required to or not. In other words, they've heard the message loudly enough and they're afraid enough. As I explain it, I think mostly of movie theaters or, for that matter, the Broadway-style theaters. I don't know very many people who would be enthusiastic right now to go sit shoulder to shoulder with 200 or 2,000 strangers in an enclosed room for a couple hours.
For sure. Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah.
And Devin's a big moviegoer. He loves the theater.
I do.
And
I did. Yeah.
Did. Exactly.
Yeah. Now I can't.
Well, that's a great point.
Yeah.
And it's not going to last forever. You know, I would predict as soon as we have a vaccine and you can be assured that you're protected, that will end all that. Right. And that's going to happen next year. I mean, but I do think we'll be going back, phasing in, as we've been saying long before that. But I think it will be interesting to see how a vaccine impacts our behaviors, if everything goes back to the way it was, or if some things, as you said before, some people may find they like working at home. You know, all these meetings we used to have and travel to, now they're held online, and people may say, yeah, we don't have to travel. Although, you know, that's the fun part of going to a meeting, but people may decide you don't need as many, even after a vaccine. But the vaccine is going to be an interesting time, right? There'll be a vaccine that works and protects. And a lot of those people will go back to the theaters then, for sure.
Yeah. So do you think that that like all of this stuff, wearing masks, limited amount of people in grocery stores, very few people in theaters, this is like likely to be a thing for the next, like, until a vaccine?
No, I think my feeling is that if let's say this thing ends at the end of June, right, and there's no more sustained transmission. I think before then, as the numbers drop, you could start phasing people back with those kinds of conditions that we talked about. And then, you know, you do it slowly and you see the numbers of infections. If nothing happens, if you don't see any increases, you can have more and more people come back. You can slowly relax the precautions, have more people in a grocery store and so forth. And you just keep an eye on the number of infections. You know, this is coupled with very close monitoring of the situation. And then you look very carefully in September and October, and you start to see whether cases start to go up or not. And if they do in a substantial way, then you return to face masks and fewer people in establishments and so forth. And you do that most likely over the winter. But you don't have to close things down, because I do think this second set of infections in the fall are going to be less extensive. And so we have to shut down the world.
And sorry, real quick follow-up. Like, do you feel like governors, for the most part, are being informed by scientists and to make these decisions? Like, is there a system in place that directs?
Oh, no, there isn't a system. That's the problem.
Oh, shit.
I mean,
okay. Okay.
So here, the person I trust at the top is Tony Fauci, right?
Okay.
He has people's health in mind. He really wants to save lives. I mean, he's the consummate physician. He's interested in saving lives, and he uses science to do that. But it's been hard to propagate all his recommendations to all the states, right? There's no top-down leadership. And so it's really been left up to individual states. So what do states do? They have departments of health, right?
Yeah.
And they depend on their leadership. Some of them are really good, and some of them are not very active, so they don't have a lot of experience. And I don't think having 50 states determining their own policy is a really good idea. I think they should all be told what to do and how to come back out of this in unison. And so that's lacking. And so, no, they're not listening to scientists. Typically, the state governors listen to their Department of Health. The head of the Department of Health is usually a doc, And that's the way it's traditionally worked. And that doc, if he or she is good, will consult scientists about what's going on.
But some don't, and that's why we're seeing such varied responses state by state.
Yeah, I'm amazed
Yeah.
at some states where the governor says, I don't see why we have to social distance, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is like ignoring science and public health, right? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Open up the beaches. Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
this is mixing politics with science and medicine, which shouldn't be. They should be separate. And when you mix them, then you have problems because you're not making intelligent choices, which is based on public health measures. So, and that varies state by state for sure. Maybe we should be 50 countries. I don't know.
That's a crazy discussion there. There are definitely pros and cons to giving states individual power.
Devin, I've gotten through most of my questions, and we only have, it's almost 10 o'clock for Vincent. So if you have more, because I know you had a lot, why don't you hit him up while we still have him and we don't keep him up too late at the end of a long day?
Is there anything, I'm going to throw an Ethan question at him. Is there any, which I've learned to do from Ethan, is there anything you wish we had asked you?
You know, every journalist I talk to always ends with that question.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's, well, you know, it's funny. So they start by saying, is this still a good time to talk? Every one of them says the same damn thing. I don't know if they teach you that in J school, right? So you make an appointment a day ahead or a week ahead, and then they call you, is this still a good time? It's like, what, you can't think of anything else to say? Okay, fine. I'm being cranky. And then the last thing they say is there anything that you wanted to say? And you know what? I always have something to say. And then the conversation goes on for another 10, 15 minutes because I say stuff that they never thought of. I said, wow, I didn't know that. So,
well, fantastic. Then Devin's asked you the perfect question.
I really feel like you've been through the ringer here, that you're kind of battle hardened at this point. This is what publicity does to you, man. You slowly erodes your faith in humanity until you're fucking done. Yeah. And then you'll be the one in the lab bioengineering the viruses.
So yeah, but I enjoy talking about this topic very much. I could go on for a long time. There are many things we haven't touched on, which are fascinating to touch on. And if people, in a non-outbreak situation, if people want to talk about viruses, as I said before, I'm always happy to come back. And there's so many cool things we could talk about that would blow you away.
Oh, I'm so down, man. Like, I will 100% take you up on that. Ethan too, if he's up for it. But we could have a whole conversation about just herpes viruses, just the viruses, the ones that take over the brain and make people do shit, like those kind of things. Like, oh yeah, there's. I'm so down.
Oh, well, absolutely. Yeah. We should do a Dr. R Returns no coronavirus talk show at some point, right? Where we do a show that's about all the other cool things. You
probably get the feeling that people are just using you for the COVID-19 coverage. Let me tell you what, man, I am fascinated in your general knowledge. I will talk to you just about cool shit that viruses do any day.
I'm worried that people are going to go away after this outbreak and they're not going to want to know about viruses, but they're so cool. I hope people stay and keep learning. And if we can do a regular virus show, that would be very cool. I'm happy. And I could wow people for sure. But anyway, you said, is there anything else? So we haven't talked much about vaccines, right?
No, we haven't.
I'm really stunned at how much activity there is in the vaccine arena. There are like 80 different kinds of vaccines, 80 companies working on vaccines. Some of them are similar approaches. And, I give a vaccine lecture in my course and I go through all the different kinds of vaccines you can make. And every one of those is being explored for this virus. It is amazing. So that's why I have a lot of faith in there going to be at least one, or probably more that work, because so many different approaches are being taken. They're taking the virus, for example, and just inactivating it and injecting it into people. So you can grow up a ton of it, you treat it with something so it doesn't infect you, but it still stimulates immunity. They're going to inject it at you. Here's another cool approach. So people are doing something called recoding the genome. All right. So, amino acids are specified by a triplet code, right? 3 bases for each amino acid.
I didn't know that, but okay.
Okay. You didn't know that. They taught you that in high school. Come on.
I went to a really weird high school.
There are 4 bases and combinations of 3 specify an amino acid. There are 21 amino acids.
Okay.
But there can be up to 6 different codes for one amino acid. All right, 6 different combinations of 3.
Mhm.
And so in a virus, there's usually at one position, this amino acid has this code. So we can recode it so it's a different code, but it's the same amino acid. And if we do that throughout the whole virus, now you make it unable to cause disease. So you make a vaccine out of it. Even though it's the same protein, you've changed the RNA enough, apparently that makes a difference. And so people are recoding the genome. And there's a computer algorithm that's used to take the sequence and just recode it so it makes the same amino acids, different sequence. Then you synthesize it and you test that. So that's a really brilliant approach.
Could the vaccines that are being developed for COVID-19 right now have implications on future viruses? And like that development could basically accelerate development of vaccines and the way that we approach viruses in general?
Totally. So a lot of approaches
Awesome.
are being tested that haven't been tested before because there's such an urgency. And I think a number of them, like this mRNA vaccine, man, if that works, that is brilliant because you can make it so quickly. It's the first in people so far in this outbreak. And if that works, you could use it for any new virus that emerges. And some of these other approaches too are really, really exciting. And so this is going to really stimulate vaccinology in general. Although let me say something. I've heard people already say, I'm not taking any SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. I don't take vaccines. Give me something else. And I just don't understand it. I don't get it.
The idea would be that there's some long-term effect that's not been studied.
Well, it's the anti-vax movement, maybe.
Well,
I'm
just putting out. Not that I believe this. I would get a vaccine, but I'm saying like that would be the argument, right? There'd be some long-term damage to be caused as a result of taking the vaccine.
That's one of the many arguments, but mostly some people just have a philosophical opposition to taking a vaccine, which I guess you have a philosophical opposition to being healthy. So I don't get it, but I knew this would happen with this vaccine, which is unfortunate. But nevertheless, there will be good vaccines, and sometime next year, 2021, and for sure available for the fall of 2021 when we have that next potential outbreak. And then looking further, eventually we'll get much of the Earth's population immunized, and so this will just become another common cold coronavirus at some point. And so that's very interesting to me to follow that.
That's a really strong prediction. In other words, it makes sense to me what you've said, but I don't think anyone in the past has brought up the idea that really the current coronaviruses might have been, when they first emerged, had there been dense societies, just as deadly as this one, because no immunity, no anything.
Right.
But now over hundreds or even more likely hundreds of thousands of years of human transmission,
sure,
they're no big deal. And so you're literally predicting, and I'm sure you can't be certain this is true, but you're predicting that with enough years, COVID-19 will become, in the broad human population, no big deal. It will drop off or taper off.
Yes, and in fact, those 4 human coronas, I think 2 of them have origins in bats and 2 of them come from rodents, and they all went through an intermediate animal before humans. And that probably happened hundreds of years ago, before we were tracking epidemics and we didn't even notice it. Yeah. And before global travel and so forth. So we would not have noticed it. But if it happened today, and it did happen today, it's SARS-CoV-2, it's going to be another one of those common cold viruses.
And
yes,
so
I think there's precedent in history for that.
Eventually, between the people who are most susceptible, unfortunately dying off, and for that matter, we see that very young children are rarely affected. So if it had been out there for the last 100 years, all the people who are unfortunately old and are 70 or 80 or 90 and are getting it and they're dying would have instead had it at 7, 8, or 10 when it would have had very little effect.
Exactly.
Oh, that is. So it's what in my world we would call a point in time problem. Like wait 10 years, wait 20 years. It'd be terrible during that, and we don't want to do that. But it would just diminish.
Yes, exactly right. That's what I was saying earlier, that we have precedent for this in the common cold coronas, and this looks like it's going to be following a similar trajectory. And one of the pieces of information that supports it is that kids are not getting sick, just like they don't with their first common cold corona infection.
Wow.
And that's why I called it a brilliant strategy, right? As far as a strategy can go. Instead of having to vary from year to year like influenza, or to make hundreds of different viruses that can all infect you. One virus that just makes crappy immunity, but when you get infected again, it doesn't make you sick.
Well, your point for virus proliferation, so the virus survives because SARS-CoV-1 failed to survive. It was eliminated, so it failed as a virus, as a perpetuation strategy. Infecting children in a way that doesn't harm them.
Yes.
And allows, because what you really want as a virus, from a design viewpoint, is very high transmissibility and no host lethality. Host lethality is a defect.
That's right.
It's a flaw from a virus.
Right. And so in this case, the lethality is mitigated by being immune or partially immune, right? That gives you protection.
Right.
So, and that's actually true for a number of other viruses. There are viruses called rotaviruses that cause gastroenteritis. And typically when you're younger, you get them, you get horrible diarrhea and vomiting. Then you get more, your immunity doesn't last, but every subsequent infection are asymptomatic until you're older. Yeah. So when I had kids, young kids, they brought these viruses home, we would get sick. And then as you get older and older, you get less and less sick because you have a little bit of immunity that protects you. So it's one of several strategies for ensuring that a virus will find a new host, right?
Devin.
What's been the coolest publication that you've been on? The coolest public thing you've done for this so far? Is it us?
Of course. It's Twitch, 3 times on Twitch. Yeah.
It's kind of unique,
second
right?
place.
It's kind of unique, right? Like it's like live streaming, like video game type stuff. It's different, right? Because you're probably talking to a lot of boring journalists from like CNN and stuff that are like, "What do you think about viruses? Like, have you heard that?"
Oh, I think it's a great community. So, my 2 sons are gamers, so I knew about Twitch a long time ago, and I told Ethan once many years ago, someone from Twitch contacted me and they wanted me to live stream one of my podcasts because they said, we want to bring some educational component to Twitch. And it never worked out. I never followed up. But so I've always had this interest in being there. And you just reach a different person, right? You wouldn't reach otherwise. So that's why I'm happy to do it. And I know we got a big impact and we've done it 3 times now. So I really like this a lot. This is great. But if you want to know my second most favorite, so we have this newspaper called the New York Times here. You heard about that?
A little bit. Yeah.
So they have this Sunday magazine and they have long form articles. And this Sunday, there's going to be an article about the pandemic and I'm featured largely in it. So I think that's pretty cool.
Nice.
Since I haven't done anything, it's nice to get featured.
Well, I have gotten dozens of messages from people that, because I am keeping a living notepad on a website called Pastebin that exists in my Discord of all of the things that you say, as well as putting them up on YouTube. And I've gotten dozens of messages from people that have said that you have been unbelievably helpful, and also that you've been a very big, and I think this is maybe the most important thing, not just providing good information, but you're reducing anxiety, because you're like, it's very easy to like fucking explode because of all this negative shit going around. And the fact that you bring shit out and just you translate it in such a good way and you say it like it is, it's very, very refreshing. And I can go home and sleep easier because I know I'm not going to die tomorrow to like the gigavirus. So thank you for that.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good.
Yeah.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah, my chat's very complimentary of your public speaking and your calm demeanor, for sure. They believe that you would do well just in case there's an opening at the head of the CDC. You have a certain number of advocates that believe you do well.
We'll vote for you. Yeah. If it's a voting thing.
Yeah.
We'll send a lot of emails. We'll do something. Yeah.
I like doing this, being a regular guy and just educating people. I don't want to head the CDC or anything like that. I just want to be able to keep communicating and engage people and get them excited and have them say virology is just the coolest thing. I love it. And that's makes my day, frankly.
One of the things real quick on that is the number of people that get inspired by someone that can, I think about this a shit ton. Cause what I do for my stream is I do like very deep, like Twitch data analytics, like meta game industry stuff. That's like pretty complicated. And like for the number of people that because you speak so transparently and clearly on virology, you inspire young people to actually go into that field. And I would venture to say that there is some percentage of people that by reaching out, by listening to you, will actually get interested in it. You're kind of like a Neil deGrasse Tyson or that sort of thing of virology, which is really cool. And you should keep that up.
I would like to have his reach, frankly. How do I
keep doing content and you can get it? Yeah. I mean, your YouTube is not bad. And I put it in my chat and I'll do it again. But if you keep doing content like that, that'll happen.
Okay, I will.
Yeah, well, particularly at this time, right? It's a huge consumption of things like consumption of informational content. Obviously, people are at home; they have more time to watch. So, I'm sure your virology class will have more views this year than it did last year. I say that.
Go to this YouTube.
I say that with confidence.
Subscribe.
So my lectures are off the charts this year. It's amazing.
Yeah. So there you go. Right. It's your breakout year as someone informing.
Yeah. It's teaching people why it's cool. Because like I believe that like everything in life is awesome at a certain level of expertise. You just explain it. It's like fucking fascinating. So like translating that for virology is like your dharma.
Yeah. I do appreciate that from people in other fields when they explain things, right? I love it when a good explainer comes along. So I appreciate that, and I aspire to that. So I'm glad to hear that people like it. Yeah.
So Vincent, one more question, and I'll call it good at that point. Are there other ways we should worry about this virus being transmitted on the fringes? So someone has asked me, could it be transmitted by mosquitoes? But I'll generalize that a little bit more. Say blood transfusions, or are there we know it spreads by coughs and contact. Are there ways are there any other ways this might spread that we would need to worry about?
So there are a couple of things we can talk about. So mosquitoes is probably no, because, mosquitoes, the way they transmit viruses, they take a blood meal. The female mosquito takes a blood meal so they can mature their eggs. And when they do that, they put their proboscis right into your capillary. They draw out blood. And if you have viruses in your blood, they will get in the mosquito. Viruses will reproduce in the mosquito. And then when it takes another blood meal, it'll deliver those viruses to them. So you have to have a good amount of virus in your blood so the mosquito picks it up, because, they don't pick up very much in terms of volume. Mm-hmm. And so most viruses do not reach that level in the blood so that a mosquito would pick up enough. So even West Nile virus, for example, which is spread by mosquitoes, it never goes human to human by a mosquito. It always goes bird, human, bird, horse, bird, human, because humans don't have enough virus in their blood. They get sick from the infection, but they don't have enough to make a mosquito pick it up. And so that's why SARS-CoV-2 will never go into a mosquito, because we hardly have any virus in our blood. People have looked and it's quite low. So that's not an issue. The other potential shedding point is feces, right? Some people are shedding virus in feces because we know it goes in the intestine in a good number of people. They even have gastrointestinal symptoms during infection. And no one has really looked at the contribution of fecal shedding. You may know that during the SARS-1 outbreak, there was an incident in a apartment house in Hong Kong where there was faulty plumbing. I think they'd remove the traps from the toilets. Traps are important. They're filled with water so that sewer gases don't back up into your bathroom, but someone had removed them. And so there was one person who was shedding SARS-1 in feces, and when they flushed their toilet, it made a plume in every other toilet in the building. And many people got infected, and they could trace the infection by the plumbing.
PPP, the poison poop plume. It's just a real vision. It's like a new secret weapon.
Right. So we've had fecal swabs. Now we have fecal plumes. So this has not been explored much with SARS-2. And I wonder, when you discharge a patient who's no longer shedding from the nose, what if they're still
discharging?
And so that's an interesting issue, but has not been explored. And that's really the only other way that I can see that we should worry about transmission.
All right. Well, You've been very generous with your time. You've gone 2 hours with us as always, and I know it's 10 o'clock there. Devin, anything you want to wrap up with?
I said what I was going to say about you being an inspiration to people, and I mean it. So I'm holding to that.
Yeah, and I'll definitely echo Devin at some point, because I know you're so passionate about viruses, and both of us are fascinated. We will talk. I understand that your personal research, a lot of it is on polio. Is that right? That's been your focus through a lot of your career?
Most of my career, I've worked on polio. Recently, we started to work on another polio-like virus that's been causing outbreaks in the U.S. every 10 years. Every 2 years. We expect it to cause another outbreak in August, September. So that may be in the news. It causes paralysis of kids.
Oh.
And, if there's an outbreak, we should talk about it for sure.
Absolutely. Well, we would love to have you back and talk about that. And of course, I know as this continues, you've been so generous with your time. I'm sure you'd come back to talk more about the evolution of coronavirus if we need to.
Well, this virus is doing things every day, and there's always something to talk about. So you can bet for the next months that there will be interesting things, and I'm happy to come and tell you about them.
All right. Well, thank
Excellent.
you. Thank you so much. My audience, I know Devin's as well, we are incredibly appreciative of your expertise and your time. We're headed into a brave new world as countries, states, businesses, and next fall, at least schools, open back up.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said to a lot of other people, this is going to be a laboratory for leadership decisions. That one way to think of it, and I know you teach, is we essentially assign the same assignment to every leader around the globe at the same time. We gave them all the same term paper: manage your business, your school, your state, your country, your city in the face of the following challenge. Please, use front and back and show your work. And now we're going to be able to evaluate all of that over the next year. How do we grade everyone? So it's fascinating. So
that's an interesting question. I did a pod with someone today, and he asked me at the end, I want you to grade these different organizations from, on a A to F. Your CDC, WHO, the media, President Trump, the U.S. population. He went through all of them. It was very interesting.
And I've tried to keep you out of political jail. I'm sure the chat would love to hear that, but we'll leave it for another time.
Yeah, we could do it another time.
All right. Well,
thank you, Vincent.
Yeah, thank you so much. You have a wonderful night.
All right, stay safe, okay?
All right,
Okay.
we'll do.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Man, I love that guy.
Yeah, he's awesome, dude.
Like-
that
like-
dude's fucking great.
Uh,
yeah,
He's
good
just,
show. Yeah,
he's so peaceful too. Like, I feel like even if I'm gonna die, I'm probably not gonna die. Because he just makes it so calm. Yeah, but
right.
But he also has a lot of great information. So we've been blessed. But Devin, you and I will have to tag team. So here's my takeaway for you. I'm not going to bother to reset how you appear on my screen, but you're there. Here's my takeaway, my freebie for you on how the world of venture capital is forever changed. 10 years ago, when AWS came out and other cloud services, venture capitalists used to have to, if you were going to start a software startup or a hardware startup, they had to provide funding for you to buy a bunch of hardware, a bunch of servers, a bunch of compute power. And so their amount they needed to fund you included things like your office and your salaries and also your hardware. Well, AWS came out and they said, oh, why are we paying for hardware anymore? Get it from the cloud. And that way, the official way to express it is what was a capital cost instead became an operating cost. So it went from CapEx to OpEx. And the point is you could pay by the month. And so they could fund you very little. Well, VCs are already twigging to the fact hey, what's this office expense line doing in your budget, like in your pitch?
Oh,
And by the way, are those all San Francisco salaries? Because you're gonna like why
because you could be remote.
you could be remote.
So
Hire
like,
some
why are you charging like everyone like $300,000 a year for a software
right.
dev engineer?
Get some
Yeah.
software
Mhm.
devs in Des Moines and Costa Rica,
Uh-huh.
and you
Yeah.
don't need an
Ugh.
office. And so, and if a VC has two competing pitches to basically build the same thing, right? The new turnip twaddler, or whatever. And one is totally virtual with low salary people in different geographies, and one is a downtown office in Palo Alto.
Mm-hmm.
One bet cost me $5 million to fund it. One bet cost me $2 million to fund it. Like, this is very quickly, I believe, and it's only a prediction, but I believe the startup world is forever changed.
You think that do you think that like some substantial amount of businesses might also be changed in the sense that they just don't bring people back to work at the velocity they did? Is like open offices are different, things like that?
What do you mean by bring people back to work? Bring people in?
Well, let's say before we had a business that had 30 people in open offices with 14 inches of desk space. And now what does that look like? And how do people evaluate that? And like previously you had like it, like I look at the San Francisco type companies, you had like basically the strategy was open offices with meeting rooms. So like Twitch, for example, is like pretty confined space. And then you've got like a meeting room, or Riot has pretty confined space. And you've got like a meeting room. They're named after champions. You have like Ari or Tristana or things like that. I wonder how much that changes, especially because of what you just said, or what you said earlier in the show, which is like people are to some extent becoming cognizant of the fact that it might be more effective to stay at home.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
I can share what I've observed in my own team, I think. And productivity at home differs by all these factors. Do you have kids who currently aren't in school that you have to homeschool? That lowers productivity. We have employees who live alone in small like studios, and they don't have room for a desk. So they no longer have their two monitors and their keyboard. They're working off their laptop, sitting on their couch. That lowers productivity. But then you also have people who've gotten out of those 2-hour commutes, and that raises their productivity because they're no longer commuting at that kind of. And so what I have heard from talking to, and there's like you and I share Hike Hephaestus is in both of our communities. His team's productivity is is good or better because they were already all remote. And he went all remote because that worked for him. So blah, blah, blah. What I can definitely say is companies that weren't willing to consider remote work are finding that it's at least tolerable some of the time, and that's going to change society. The other thing I could say for sure is offices are friggin' expensive.
Space is expensive.
Sure, you pay rent where you're sitting right now, right? You're in your studio.
We do, yeah.
You showed me a little bit of the Nerd Fusion cost run rate at some point. Office space was not your number one expense, but it's a real expense. And
yeah, we pay a lot. Yeah,
and you may still need that for like specialized studio. Like this is one of the challenges. Some jobs need special equipment that you can't really put in someone's home. So like rebuilding your whole studio in a home doesn't work. Not really. Not the Nerd Fusion production.
We can't
studio.
get anywhere close. Yeah, we Blackmagic cameras, stuff like that. Like we have to have an open studio for it. Yeah.
Right, but that's rare. That's a for office work. That's rare. Now, obviously, like if what you do is repair cars, that probably is going to happen in or weld steel or whatever. Factory work is still going to be in factories.
Yeah.
But office work, I mean, it's knowledge work. I think my opinion is that COVID-19 has accelerated adoption of what was already there. I've thought about this a lot. The office work week has been a constant in our lives for more than 100 years. Like office work was established, albeit in lower numbers, going back to like the turn of the previous century. And it was understood that like the work week began at 9 a.m. on Monday and ended at 5 p.m. on Friday. and you went to an office and you did your work, that's been upended because we all, you know, I wish I had a count and I don't have this data, but like how many office workers are working from home around the world? My rough count would be a couple 100 million.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the U.S., there's 160 million employed people. You know, 160 million employed people. Some portion of them are office workers. The same is true in Europe. The same is true in some other places. So I don't know. You have to decide your percentages. Someone probably can get the facts, but probably 200 million people practicing work from home. That's got to change society. Like you have 200 million, because also, to be fair, those are influential, relatively well-paid. They may be middle class. They may be upper middle class. They may be filthy rich. But generally, those are the influential decision makers in society. And for God's sakes, all of our politicians are working from home.
Yeah.
Like,
we already knew that the 8-hour workday was over. There's been tons of studies on that, right? That the 8-hour workday is way overbearing. Like we don't need with the level of automation we have in our society, we do not need 8-hour workdays to complete and function and progress, right?
yeah.
So that's already like interesting. Like the 9 to 5 is based on an 8-hour workday. We don't need one because we have more automation. We have programs doing shit for us. We don't need it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's more about people being effective.
And so this is no doubt one of the reasons I've told we talked about the last time you and I did a show together with Dr. Baker and so on. I'm fascinated because this is the biggest change in the work environment that will happen in my career. And so right now,
that's crazy.
Right now, the focus is on the pandemic and the disease and the economy. But the downstream question is, how will the nature of work be forever changed? And, I work with, say, professional workplace coaches, and I have a career coach. And that's her whole topic. Like her whole topic is talking to all of her clients about how is your workplace evolving, because work is work. You just look at it this way. Like if you run an office, it's going to be very hard to tell all your people who've been working at home, hey, everything is going back June 1st to exactly how it was. It's like it never happened. Just pretend it was a bad, weird nightmare.
Yeah. And everyone's been doing this thing for months. Right.
You learn nothing from it. I still think I want to employ you. So I'm not criticizing your performance exactly for the last 3 months, but I'm going to require that you do it exactly like you used to, like none of this ever happened. Like you can't imagine that sticking. And particularly if company A is more flexible and says, that worked pretty well, I think you could continue to work from home sometimes. And company B is more like, you will do it how you always have. What's going to happen, right? People at company B are going to hear from their friends at company A and, naturally migrate. So my opinion is the nature of work has totally changed. So anyway,
That's awesome.
We can do a whole and that's a drama that's going to unfold a little more slowly because so many things depend on it right now, right? Office space and leases but again, going to the point of startups, if you had a startup and that startup if I start a new startup, and to my point, I'm incented economically to start it virtually, do I ever build an office?
Yeah.
Because
we should do a show on this.
You grow up not having an office. So is there some magic line? Like when you reach 20 people, you need an office. When you reach 200 people, you need an office, or is it just never? I don't know. Those are the questions that fascinate me about this, though, because this is where you'll see me get jacked because it's my thing, right?
I can see it.
It's
let's do a show on it, man.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. 100%.
I'll catch up and we'll schedule it.
Yeah, that'd be fucking super cool. Like you lead and I'll get some notes together and we'll do it. I think people in chat are saying they'd love it.
All right, fantastic. Well, we'll get all over it. So, Devin, always a pleasure to co-host with you, buddy.
Back at you, man. Thank you so much. This is fucking awesome. I've got a couple ideas too that we should catch up on.
Hey, man, Discord or tell me when you wanna chat or whatever. But
all right.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to see you.
And you as well, my friend.
All right.
I'll catch up with you offline.
All right. Good night,
all
buddy.
Right. Peace.
All right. So everybody, we're starving to death, and they're already out for dinner and other stuff. Not all of them. I have a wonderful crew, a bunch of mods here. But if anybody was watching, I started the show with coffee, and it's empty. And then I drank a big beer, the Lindemann's Lambic Framboise, as promised. And then I've been making my way through my cup of water. So this show must end, and I bet you can all envision why. So it wasn't really wine shadow. It was the Framboise, which looks red, poured into a wine glass, because that's the right way to treat it. But thank you, everybody, for turning up for Dr. R. He's awesome. Thank you to everybody who followed the channel and joined in. We even got to ask, I don't know if he's still here, but the gentleman who wanted to know about mosquito transmission. We got to give VIP badges to Liger, who introduced me to Dr. R. I could not have ever met him or brought him on without Liger. And earlier, we added a VIP badge for Danana, who makes our emotes. And she's got several new ones under construction. We have a bunch of new emote slots since the channel was partnered. So thank you all as always. I'm many of you know Healthy Gamer, Dr. Canagia. I'm on a world tour of PhDs and medical doctors trying to figure out coronavirus in the office and trying to figure out how to lead my team. And so we've done economists or finance professors. We've done virologists. My next stop is psychologists, psychiatrists, and I'm going to go talk to Dr. Canagia at 12 o'clock Pacific on Friday. He and I are going to talk about fear and employee fear and fear around coronavirus, fear of unemployment, how fear drives us in our behaviors around this. And so I'll go on his channel. I'll host it on mine, but I'll focus on his. I won't be here broadcasting. I'll just host. But I want to do a 1 hour with him to cover the psychological aspects. And then I'm working on a Harvard business professor who's being difficult to reach, unfortunately. So I'm not sure I'm going to score him. Which is very frustrating to me. So if there's someone who has tons of influence at Harvard, hit me up in Discord, because I need you to track a guy down. No stalking, but I really would like to get a business expert. So we really need a well-known name in we need a well-known name in the business world to talk about the business aspects. So yeah, if any of you ever have great guests for me, by the way, you can jump in my Discord and get in touch with me. I would love to have, I love to have good guests. And what would we have done if we hadn't had Liger bring us Dr. R? So if you do know an excellent guest we should have here to talk about careers, etc., this whole series of shows has been driven by that introduction. So whether it's at Harvard or somewhere else, I need a kick business and organizational dynamics professor, and that's what I'm trying to land next. So with that, thank you all very much. I will see you hopefully Friday. Please come join us Friday at 12 noon. And with that, I'm gonna go take care of the liquid problem. And then have dinner. So thank you all very much. And as we say at the end of every channel, and as one of our new emotes will be when it comes out, cheers.